Will we start the fantasy playoffs with Deebo Samuel on our bench? That and more this week on the couch. We need answers. We got JetPack Galileo. Deebo Samuel says, no, I'm just not getting the ball. I'm not struggling. Maybe other people may differ, but we may are struggling to figure out whether he should be in our lineup this week.
Yeah, I'm going to play him this week. I think squeaky wheel gets the grease, as we say, but big key with them losing their running backs. I think Deebo will have to be more involved. As far as what I'm seeing schematically from them, it's just a matter of time. And I think the matchups play a big part into whether Deebo ends up getting the looks. If there's a tough corner, then it's a bigger deal. But if they're playing some weak defensive backfield like the Rams, then I think he'll get his looks. There were a couple opportunities in the last game where he had 30-yard, he's wide open downfield, but Brock got sacked or something like that. So I'm not too concerned overall. I think it's frustrating big picture, but when you're looking at little small snapshots, I would still play him this week.
Just as a quick aside, because, I mean, what are the real chances Deebo Samuel's with the 49ers next year? Like, is it 50-50? Is it even 50-50?
Yeah, I don't think it could be that high. I mean, I think that paying Brandon Ayuk all that money, that was basically
That
the
was
choice.
it, right? So are we going to see a situation where, like, very few offenses have a Deebo Samuel role, and is the market going to be kind of tepid for him because he really is Deebo Samuel, and if you don't have a role for Deebo Samuel, I'm trying to figure out how he would fit in a lot of offenses.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting how the NFL general managing has evolved, and sometimes they seem like they're dumb and they have no idea what they're doing, and then in other ways, it's like, oh, you guys totally have gotten better in that way.
Right.
I think last pod you were talking about the Kenny Pickett draft class, and we talk about overvaluing quarterbacks and how a lot of people were expecting some of those quarterbacks to be pushed up higher, but they all went way late, right? Steelers at 20 was the first time, and it's like, oh wow, that's some wisdom from that
they're figuring it out,
right? Yeah. So, but there's always a team like the Jags that are going to pay Gabe Davis a decent amount of money, and so I think Deebo will have a market, but yeah, it might be just 2 or 3 teams that are looking at him. But any Shanahan, there's 8 teams running Shanahan style
That's
offenses,
true.
so he can plug in anywhere from that standpoint. And if the money's under 25, I think some team is going to want to do that.
Right. As you describe that scenario, I'm thinking, like, you're right. It only takes one team to draft. It only takes one team. And you hope that free agency matches a skill set with a team that's ready to utilize that skill set. Like, they see the player clearly for who they are, and they value that player higher than any other team. But when I think about Deebo Samuel at this tail end of his career, it's almost like, I'm not trying to disparage Deebo Samuel when I say this. It's like, who's the sucker team? Who's the team that's just throwing money at their problems and probably are going to be a disaster organization? It doesn't make me feel that great. But let's get back to the present. Let's talk about, speaking about squeaky wheel, and this doesn't really affect lineup decisions, but I think we have to take notice. You got Brandon Graham going out in the sunset, riding off, pulling back the curtain on some taboo topics, right? I mean, there's 32 teams. There's probably at least one thing this juicy behind the curtain for every team, but teams keep this stuff in house. Brandon Graham didn't. He apologized that what he said, Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown used to be friends, but not now. Wow. Do you think this is something we're going to see ripple onto the field this week against the Steelers?
No, I think it's kind of crazy that it's hilarious that any of that comes out, and it's so fun that we live in the time where we're in, where players will just talk openly about it, and this has been hidden from us for tons of years, and to have all the drama of like Donovan McNabb and Terrell Owens.
Oh yeah, it spilled over.
Yeah, Terrell picked up. He retweeted it just recently, so it's so funny to see just these themes of, you expect, I think, the best of players, that, oh, you're going to be professional, you're going to figure out how to make it work. And there's all these times where it doesn't. I'm a big Niner fan, so I think of like the Jim Harbaugh era and all the conflict that kind of came out with Trent Baalke and the way that kind of fell apart in 2013, 2014. And at that point in my life, when I'm reading all these articles or you're reading rumors, you think, no, this is fake, or somebody's leaking something that is just to throw people off. There's too much at stake for them to sacrifice the relationship or sacrifice the team. And it ended up being like everything is true. And all the drama that comes out, that's real drama. And reporters are actually, they have a real source. And so it's fun to see that world, but surprising and kind of fits with historical pieces of all these men in power that they have their own drama, right? Kings and emperors and things like that.
Right.
And this is the same kind of category of things. These millionaire, athletes. I want the ball more. You're not giving me the ball more. I don't know what it is, right? But it's so fascinating to me.
It is. There's a couple of things that come up. Of course, Denny Carter, who I love, who's on the couch. His skeleton key to social media presence by position. Quarterbacks.
Yes.
I love my teammates. God is good. Running backs say keep grinding. To try and say derp. And wide receivers, enemy speaks kindly but carries a knife. And I know that from a psychological standpoint, we are on the couch. I think it does have to do with wide receivers being on an island. I think it has to do with wide receivers having such an everything they do has such an outsized impact. I mean, you could end your career as a wide receiver. You can basically like ruin your reputation on like just a handful of plays. It's just like that's it. You're only getting the spotlight on you a few times a game, and what you do in those few times can determine whether you get any more opportunities. So you do have to have a different kind of personality. But I love the way you bring up the idea of the drama behind the scenes, because there's creative friction, right? I'm thinking of teams where like the offense and defense were enemies, and the offensive and defensive coaches kind of played off of each other, where it's like, we're going to win in spite of them. But there's also this negative friction. And what is interesting about this one, Mr. Galileo, JetPack,
whatever you prefer,
JPG. What is interesting about this is that Jalen Hurts, and this matches his personality, right? He seems to be the ingratiating, like hat in hand, like, yeah, I need to do better. He's not the alpha who he's really admitting. I don't want to say showing weakness, because it's not actually weakness, but it makes me feel okay about, at least in terms of the output, that this is going to not be something that actually causes cracks or friction in this team. But it is a little interesting. I mean, Jalen Hurts is not a typical personality for a quarterback. I mean, do you think many other quarterbacks would just be like, yeah, he's got a point. Like, I need to do better.
Yeah, well, there's something about like when you serve or when you submit to something, then you overcome it, right? And he's being the solid rock for the team in doing that. So no matter what the drama is, right, just by saying, hey, I need to improve and be better, he takes ownership. And that's what you want out of your CEO and your leader of the franchise and all that stuff. And so when a quarterback doesn't do that, it really stands out. And I think players get a sense of that. But when this kind of inevitably comes up with any diva receiver, if the quarterback is willing to say, no, you know what, it's fine, we'll get better, we'll get on the same page, then it just washes away. And
yeah.
Pro Bowl seasons, all that stuff.
The Matador. One of the only things I got at a thrift shop when I was in college, and I've taken it from location to location, many locations in my life, is this big mass-produced painting of a matador with the calm in his eyes. You never take the bull by the horns. And Jalen Hurts has had to believe in himself against messages from the universe, from the football god, saying, no, you just don't measure up, so many times. He's had to rally back from that so many times. So he's learned that. And the other thing I feel like I want to bring up right now is I just looked up, because there was something that came up with Bryce Young at praying, I think, when a member of the opposite team was hurt. And I was reminded about Troy Polamalu, who's awesome. I still submit that the Pittsburgh Steelers, I'm a Pittsburgh guy, Western Pennsylvania born and bred, that the stories, the individuals in the story of the Pittsburgh Steelers really stand out as unique individuals. And Troy Polamalu is a completely unique individual because his personality and what he transmits, what his aura transmits as a person, is basically the opposite of what you would expect with hard-hitting safety, chaos. And he prayed before every play. If you go back and watch Steelers games from the Troy Polamalu era, he's crossing himself before every play. I think he might pray at the end of the play too. And they asked him why he prayed. And I wish I should just put the clip in here, right? If I was some whiz bang stuff, but he basically says, he's scared first. And, and Troy Polamalu's voice sounds like, like a teenager that's just gone through puberty kind of, he's like, well, first of all, I was scared.
Right.
I was scared getting hurt and other stuff. But he talked about how in the professional football player, that the sins of pride, ego, are very much something that you're constantly having to be on guard against. And he's praying for that too, that he can guide himself through that maze. And I think that some of the stuff we're talking about comes to that point. So enough spiritual, religious talk. I do want to talk about, and I want to say, I want to embarrass you and make you blush. People won't be able to see it, but you might be blushing. I, as I was saying to you before the show, like I really enjoy your presence on my timeline because you're bringing a lot of insight and analysis, and obviously a great foundation of knowledge of football and a database of watching football, but in a lighthearted way, and in a way that conveys a lot, and also very economical of language too. You can convey a lot with just like 5 or 10 words. And you were breaking down Will Levis, and you just were watching the play and said, "Oh, make the read bleep blorp." Not actually reading it in real time, right? I used to say like what the radio is picking up. Is it picking up static, or are you getting your instructions from the visual information from the game? And is that why? I mean, do you think that that's why we've seen Will Levis level off, and why we can definitively say he's not the answer? Is it the way he processes?
Yeah, I think that there are two types of quarterbacks. Just generally speaking, there are more creative types, and then there are like strict processors. And so a lot of what the problems with Will Levis are problems I see in other quarterbacks that get paid well and end up playing well long term. So I don't necessarily think it's the end of Will Levis or anything like that. But the challenge for him is he's trusting everything that he sees. And so if something shows up that's not like part of his program, or not what he expects, he's still throwing the ball in that same location. So it's going to the defender now instead of the receiver. But surprise, surprise. But I think that's the challenge with players like Trevor Lawrence or Daniel Jones is they're really smart, they're really intelligent, they operate really fast, but that speed is the priority, and speed has gotten me where I need to be in my career as far as how quickly I can move through things. But if I move too fast or I don't understand more holistically what's going on, then I'm going to make those mistakes. And so I think Trevor would be the high-end example of an athlete who's a very good player, successful. You can build a whole team around him. I think they're happy with what they have in Trevor, but it's those same kinds of things. Something shows up that's a little bit different, defensive lineman drops or whatever. It's right. The ball is still going to that side, right? He was committed. That was his plan pre-snap. So it's still going there. And I think that's drastically different than the way that you see, the Mahomes or the Josh Allens or the Lamar Jacksons process and move through their reads. So, the challenge there with Will in particular is he's just got to get more comfortable with adapting rather than just bleep blorp. This is what my assignment was. I'm going to read it. Right.
Exactly. Just executing a program, right? Yeah. And just executing the preconceived, like anybody who's coded out there can think about how you basically just lay out a few paths, and those are the only paths that it can proceed on. And hopefully human beings' judgment in real time can kind of invent paths, right? I mean, that's what the great quarterbacks do. It almost sounds like from what you're saying is that their action is a half a beat ahead of their processing. So there's no override button. Yes. If you get new information.
I think that's exactly it. I think of, and I have a tweet out there. Trevor Lawrence is reading one side of the field. He gets safety to roll to him, and he has already decided if the safety rolls, I'm going to throw to the single receiver side. It doesn't matter what else I see. And there's a flat defender right underneath it. The defender breaks it up. But it was because pre-snap he decided if I get this look or get this rotation, I'm going to go to the single receiver side no matter what. That'll get you in trouble. So with Trevor, it's just a deflected pass or whatever. With Will, that's pick.
Right.
And it's just that difference in either your accuracy or your timing or just how often that occurs that I think you see that show up more and more.
Are we going to see Michael Penix before the season's over?
I don't know. I think the build of letting him grow is really useful, particularly for his game. I would continue to play Kirk. I don't know. Where are they at as far as the hunt goes?
They're one game behind Tampa, but they have the tiebreaker because they swept them.
That's big. I would still roll with Kirk. I understand the desire to get the young guy out there and the feeling of we have all these weapons and Kirk is holding us back. But for me, I think you'll get some of the same challenge with Penix that you do with any young quarterback. And that it doesn't push you over the top in the same way that I think you can rely on Kirk in as frustrating as he may be.
Right. Well, no. And I think one of the more compelling arguments to not put Penix out there, like you said, you're talking about his development. You're taking a long view. And in the middle of the playoff hunt, it's one thing if it's week 17 or week 18, like a la Patrick Mahomes rookie year, and it's a meaningless game for the team. But if you're putting him in, it should be whenever there's not too much on the line. That being said, he is a college quarterback who had a lot of reps in multiple systems and maybe could surprise for a few weeks that would happen to coincide with the playoffs. We'll see. If the Chargers can beat Tampa this weekend, it becomes interesting. And if the Raiders, it's on Monday night, they got 2 Monday night games, and one of them is the Raiders and the Falcons. Oh, that's terrible. All the good games are at 4 Eastern, like Buffalo, Detroit, Philly, Pittsburgh. Even the Tampa Chargers game, it's all at the same time. Okay, more news, more. Now, this is something actually that I think is difficult, and I understand if the answer is, well, we'll see. Did Zach Charbonnet change the complexion of the backfield with his performance last week? Even if, or it could just be, well, for as long as Kenneth Walker's not 100%, and really, how often is Kenneth Walker 100%? Did we see some sort of plate tectonic change based on Charbonnet's performance? Or do you think this is kind of an incumbent, don't lose your job to injury, and whenever Walker is ready to play, he's going to go back to being the lead back. He's going to be the one that we want in our lineups.
Yeah, I think they might be 60-40 Walker when he gets back. But yeah, I think it's still about Walker. He's the faster player. I think he's got more talent. But it's that classic, like, don't handcuff, or you should handcuff with the same, that was one of my rare handcuff wins to get me into where I needed to be. It was, I got Charbonnet, I just plug him in. And it's what you see of, we were working with half of the pie with the starter, and now we have a full pie for the backup. Let's roll it. So, I think great for fantasy and, keep him out there when you can. But I think when Kenneth Walker gets healthy again, it'll be 60-40, kind of back to the same theme. Teams are, just in terms of the structure, I think a lot of teams don't usually usurp unless the starter is playing poorly. And I don't think Kenneth Walker is playing poorly. So they might be like, hey, we're going to get Zach more involved. So it might bump up a little bit in terms of usage. Like, we want to do more 2-back sets or whatever. But as far as like actually losing your spot and flipping to the other way, 40-60, that usually doesn't happen unless they're convinced Kenneth's not good. And I don't think that they are.
That's a good way to put it. It's not based on how well the backup performs. Is there something about the starter and coaches are loyal that way, and they should be. I mean, I think that's the right way to do things. As an aside, what do you think of what Ryan Grubb has done in his first year? As I thought I saw that Mike McDonald wanted Arthur Smith, but timing and some things got messed up, and who knows what this offense would look like if it was Arthur Smith. I see some strong negative takes. I see some, hey, this should be like a one and done thing for him.
Really?
But it's been a very, depending on what time you're watching the Seattle offense, you've got a lot of different impressions of it. What's been your impression of him this first year on the job?
Yeah, well, so first I loved the Washington offense in college, and studying Penix and studying all those receivers, it was just, I mean, as far as like his work with wide receiver screens and getting them underneath, and then also the deep game, I thought he was very versatile. So I'm a big Grubb fan. I think the challenge has been Geno adapting. So the main difference was, obviously anything's an upgrade over Waldron. We've seen that obviously, but with Geno last year, it was like hesitating on everything. And plays would be open and he'd be choking on the ball. And now this year, there was some of that he had to get over and get through. And in this last game, just watching him play, everything's so much faster. Just over the last like 2 or 3 weeks, I think he's clicking faster. And we take for granted how long it takes for a quarterback to get used to seeing pictures. It's like, and especially in the NFL, you're not going to call the same play very much. And so if a guy needs reps at a play, he's going to see it once a game. And you get those reps in practice or whatever, but to see it once a game or twice a game, that's not enough. And so it takes the entire course of the season for me to get quicker and quicker. And so I think we're starting to get that with Geno. So no, I like rubs. I like schematically what he does as far as getting good rubs downfield. I like what he does with JSN and unlocking him. So yeah, I would stick with Grubb. I'm a fan there.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. I think this one applies to Bryce Young also. And I guess, especially in fantasy football, we're prisoners of the moment, right? I mean, we're always just reacting to what happened or maybe what has happened like the last 2 weeks, you know? But sometimes, especially if you're talking about new offensive coordinators or new quarterback play caller combinations, there's a lot of potential energy that builds and builds and builds. And then it comes to the surface all at once, like you say, whenever things slow down for the quarterback. Or I think with Bryce Young, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see. I brought this up every couple of weeks with Bryce Young and Anthony Richardson, whether it's going to be an option when there's forks in the road in young quarterback development to bench them for their development, like as part of the plan. And I keep mentioning this. I wish I should go look up who told me this. That somebody told me that even in like elite military, like, that's actually a thing. Like, throw you in the deep end, pull you out while your head's spinning, then teach you about what you just got thrown into, then put you back in, right? And
give you a little taste, get you an understanding and a respect for what's going on, and then it's like, oh, okay, that's how you.
Well, it makes sense too, because then when you're in the theory part, it's not just theory. It wasn't enough to hurt you. It wasn't enough to get your head chopped off, but it was enough for you to see that your head could have gotten chopped off, like the danger. And as from a psycho-emotional standpoint, it must be helpful to animate the lessons as they're being taught based on actual experience instead of just theory. But I think Bryce Young and Dave Canales, I think this is another one where you're saying like, hey, just took some time, and come on, it takes time. And some people might point to the CBA and like the reduced number of practices they get, the time they get. But you're right. And the other thing I think about as you describe that, and I can't remember who put this out there recently, but I thought it was something really important for people to understand. And it's not, I don't think it's done every team and every play caller does it well or even does it. But the idea is that the script in the game, those first 15 plays, is really questions that offense is asking the defense to see how they answer, to then inform choices later on in the game. And there was somebody else had mentioned that maybe part of the reason the offensive scripts work is because I think there's a perception out there, and I'm sure I've thought this at some point, that the opening script is actually like a dance or something to put the defense off balance, and then off balance this way, and then boom, land the knockout punch, touchdown to open the drive, opening drive, touchdown to open the game. But really, someone had pointed out that maybe it's because when you put together that opening script, because you want to ask a certain amount of questions, like specifically in different areas of the defense, that it's not predictable. It doesn't follow the kind of sequencing that you would get later on in the game, because it's to ask those questions. But it was the specific point you made about, hey, if you're trying to solidify a concept and how to read and react in this play, in the play design, a quarterback might only get 1 or 2 chances in a game, and then you flip forward to the next week and the next week. So it's that small sample size that makes it very difficult sometimes for the gains to be seen until we need them to build up a little bit. I've got a whole bunch of players, and I'm glad you're here to help me, because really in week 15, like if you're in the fantasy football playoffs, you're all right at fantasy football, or you're really lucky, and rely on your luck. You should be making the decisions, but with 32 teams in action, it does become harder sometimes to decide about the guys on the fringe. And I've got a bunch of guys on the fringe. But before we get into that, I do want to talk about one more kind of sports talk topic. Bill Belichick, North Carolina. This is interesting. And we've gotten to see a lot more of his personality. He's definitely not shy. He doesn't mind. He likes attention,
Yeah.
What do you think about this? How do you think this is going to go?
It feels, I don't have a good comparison. And maybe I'm sure you have a good one. It feels unglorious, but at the same time, hey, like, he's living his best life, right? He's done and accomplished everything that you can. And it's like, hey, you know what? I have some extra time on my hands. I still love the game. Let me just get back into it. So interesting spot for him. As far as that team and that location, I don't know where he is in the world, or if he likes that place. But yeah, give me some of your insight, and then I'll have a deeper take on that.
Sure. Well, I mean, the only comparison I can think of is like when Deion Sanders went to Colorado, and the only reason I say that is because it's that kind of ripple, it's that kind of boom shockwave, right? But I think that I'm remembering one of Dan Campbell's speeches. I think it was the speech after the Thursday night game, and seeing that, wow, in the NFL, a big part of being a head coach is being a spiritual leader. And in a lot of ways, Bill Belichick was a spiritual leader. It was just never expressed. It was never explicit. It was just the way he went, do your job, right? Like that's the church of Belichick. And a lot of men, I think, were able to subscribe to that and become part of Belichickism. But 18, 19, 20-year-olds, well, this is going to be really interesting. And I think if you want to talk about true comparisons, it's impossible to compare because the college game is in this massive state of transition right now. Like, I don't think anybody in the college game really understands. Well, let me put it this way. Where the college game is right now in terms of, personnel management and how teams are structured and run, it's not going to stay like this. Like, we know it's going to morph into something else. It's in this weird lurch right now. Like, people are realizing, players are basically free agents on year-to-year contracts now.
Yeah. So that I think that's what makes Bill the perfect guy, because he's a pro, and college football is now a pro sport, and so he's already adapted to everything. And specifically, okay, you're going to the ACC, and we get to play against Dabo, and Dabo's whole criticism of NIL and everything. It's like the perfect guy of like, no, we're playing pro sports now. We got a pro coach that you have to account for. I think they'll win the ACC, and they'll get it figured out very quickly.
Yeah. At the very least, for the first year or two, I think it'll be like adrenaline for, what's going to be interesting is, again, like, do the kids know? I mean, Belichick's recent enough that, you're getting basically to be coached by like a football oracle, like a football encyclopedia.
Yes.
And he seems like lighthearted now. I wonder if this is going to be like Tom Coughlin. Remember the Giants finally won the 2 Super Bowls after Tom Coughlin loosened up? He was like, tough love, tough love, tough love, tough love, tough love. Okay. Like Tiki Barber's fumbles, whatever. Okay. Like, I believe in you. Like, I'm ready to let down the tough love guard and say, like, I love you and I believe in you. And then they win 2 Super Bowls. I wonder if maybe the North Carolina kids will get the benefit of Bill Belichick exhaling after everything that he did in New England. It's fascinating. It's really he's a fascinating figure. Like, I didn't think that Bill Belichick post football was going to be as interesting as he has been, and he gives us another interesting twist. What did they say? He has like a whole list of like, this is how I'm gonna do it, right? Like, he said, like, if you're gonna hire me, it's great expectations, right? Like, any of us should hope that if we get into a serious enough relationship as he's about to get into with North Carolina, and they are to get him, that they just get all this stuff out up front. So it's a fascinating time, and it'll be interesting to see how this group of players, like, we've absorbed now COVID and the players that took the year off. There was, I put out there, like, somebody should do some sort of analysis of the players who took the year off and the players who didn't, and how their careers have gone. But I think there's no appreciable difference that jumps out at you. So that's kind of been absorbed and through the washing machine. But now I think you have, how's it going to affect players who have gone through this NIL for their whole, or even like anticipating it now. Now, if you're in high school, and NIL might be coming to high school too, right? Am I crazy? Did I hear that? Or
that'd be amazing. But right? Yeah, I mean, I think when you're talking about spiritual leadership, and like coaches at the pro level, they need to be generals, and coaches at the college level previously are kind of like uncles or dads, or
right.
There's a different relationship that Dabo in particular is not like, I don't want to switch up who I am to these players. But Bill is perfect for. It's like, I'm a general. These are the mercenaries that I want to put together. This is how my build is going to be. It'll be great.
I'm now picturing Belichick as like the head of some CIA black op,
right.
Putting together his irregulars, his guerrillas, Yeah,
he took a year off and he just schemed. Well, how am I going to dominate the next challenge on the football frontier? So,
and this isn't even fantastical, right? Mike Leach had a class on this, right? I mean, Mike Leach taught a class on insurgent warfare at Texas Tech. These things aren't that remote when you think about, at least again, like the leadership. Okay, let's do, it's almost like a lightning round kind of, just so the people who are here with us in week 15, you can just give them like, I always like to go some sort of lukewarm, warm, hot, cool, cold on these players and these matchups in week 15. If people are looking at this player and somebody else, let's start with Tua Tagovailoa, who's on a 3-game heater,
Yep.
but is facing Houston without Teron Armstead.
Yeah, I mean, I'd start him. I'm all about it.
And you're not worried at all about the Houston pass rush?
It is what it is. Like, your options there, I think all the receivers are there. Everybody feels healthy as far as that goes. I think he can move around a little bit. Is his brain gonna blow up again? Like, I don't know. That's always the risk. But I mean, I think if you have Tua and he's been your starter, I'm not sitting him for like a Kirk Cousins tier type player.
Yeah, what I'm hoping is, I mean, he's always one of the fastest getting the ball out, and that maybe that's what Mike McDaniel will be able to do. What about Drake May? And we can even do data points like, one, like, let's say Tua, or what about Drake May? He's got to buy things. Maybe talk about slowing down. Talk about, we already laid down this idea, put it out there of, as the season goes on, quarterbacks going to start to get more comfortable. Is Drake May comfortable enough to trust in a fantasy football lineup in the playoffs?
Yes, yeah, I'd play Drake May. Not over Tua, but I'd play Drake May. I trust him at this point. I think the Rams game was really big as far as just I think expectation of, okay, how are you going to play well against a poor defense? That was a really great look into that. So yeah, I'd keep rolling Drake May out if you need to. Expect a pick or whatever, but it's a desperation slot. If you're choosing between Will Levis or Drake May, I think the choice is clear.
I might be a little more aggressive than you on Drake May, just because I feel like in a lot of his games, if there was just one or two breaks he had gotten, he would have been a 20 plus point play. And he incorporates the rushing upside. But also, just as a quick aside, to slow down and let this topic breathe for a second, I'm really impressed with what I've seen from Drake May because of how terrible his surroundings are. Where were you on him going into the season, and how has it changed now that you've got to see him as a pro?
Yeah, I was a big fan of him. He was my QB2. As far as the inaccuracy issues, it's nice to see that hasn't really shown up. And people made a big deal about his footwork, but I think navigating the pocket has been pretty natural for him as well. But the main theme when you watch Drake May's UNC tape is he has a lot of courage and he knows what he wants to do and he's aggressive about it. Big arm, big guy, run fast, all those things that we like to see, right? And so to not overthink it, I think, is important, because he executes intelligently, and that's different than missing some throws. So if you miss 4 throws a game, but you process intelligently, I'm okay with that.
What I'm really impressed with is that they're letting him play at the edge of his abilities. Like, they're letting him see exactly where those, because that's the kind of quarterback he is. I think Josh Allen stands out as the great example of this quarterback, and how if you allow that quarterback to explore the frontiers of what exactly they can accomplish, because they know, like you said, big, fast arm strength. I remember watching Josh Allen tape at Wyoming and seeing him convert throws that I don't think 99.8% of quarterbacks would ever even try, would ever even think they have the ability to make that throw. And Josh Allen not only tries those throws, he makes those throws. He was doing that at Wyoming, and now we're seeing him do it in the pros. So yeah, I'm maybe, and then let's add a third quarterback to this quarterback conversation. Anthony Richardson against a Denver defense that looked like they were one of the better defenses in the league until Jameis Winston just started going Air Coryell on him.
Yeah. I like Anthony Richardson as far as like how things have changed for him post benching. It's so frustrating to watch him and to see. I think all of the receivers are pretty good, but they're always letting him down. And you can look at the numbers and say, okay, 10 of 32 or whatever, right? And you watch the film and you're like, okay, well, really it's more like 20 of 32. But somehow we ended up, not connecting on 10 of those passes. And so the overall frustration with the numbers, I'm happy to put up with if they keep him going in the run game. And I really think that's what you have to lean on. Not expecting too much out of the pass game, but I would start him confidently in my normal QB starting spot against the Broncos. I'm not too concerned about them. I think they have a good build from a pass rush standpoint, but when you're outside of Surtain, you can exploit any of those corners.
Yeah, I think that I feel like Anthony Richardson's. We were drafting him as like quarterback 6.
Yeah,
I mean,
was.
I wouldn't put him at quarterback 6, but he's definitely in the top 12. And there has to be a really compelling option on the other side for me to say, nah, Anthony Richardson should be on the bench because he still has that 35 point upside. And you mentioned like 10, is it 10 for 32? Is it 20 for 32? Like I write up every week the upgrades and downgrades and so on. And I have had to say explicitly, you're probably tired of hearing this. Anthony Richardson played better than his numbers again, right? I mean, really, if you watch, and the other thing is the Shane Steichen and what Shane Steichen asks him to do are more high value plays. It was more EPA or whatever you want to add, because it's more downfield passing, and Richardson is converting some tough throws, and he's made a few throws. I'm really excited. One of the things I'm excited that what Bryce Young has done, but I feel like Anthony Richardson getting his confidence reinforced opens up the possibility of just some captivating, wondrous, awe-inspiring things because basically, again, it's amazing how Josh Allen is, after that 6 touchdown game, is just right there looming over us. On that note, by the way, speaking of Josh Allen, you going to put a chip on anybody? Dalton Kincaid's back this week. Keon Coleman's back this week. That's great. Do you just say, well, it's Buffalo, Detroit, so this game might have 90 points. So play them all. Play all your Bills and hope for the best. Any guidance as people are looking at all these Buffalo targets and trying to figure out who, if anybody, they can play?
I'd still stick with Shakir. I think he's the true separator. Cooper is, I don't want to say washed necessarily, but he's not the same Cooper. And so rolling with Shakir again would be my go-to, even though he was like a lot of the production came from that big long play, his touchdown. I still think he's the top, like most reliable option in the passing game.
Yeah, it's not that hard to picture Khalil Shakir as like a Amon-Ra St. Brown light. It's just that he's in a pass offense that doesn't concentrate targets. But it's going to get better and better. I agree with you about if I had to play one, it'd be Shakir. And I think you're right to draw some attention to Amari Cooper had like 14 targets last week, something like that. And he made a few Amari Cooper plays, but with Keon Coleman back out there, with Kincaid out there, we'll see. What a compelling game, Buffalo Detroit. That's the Super Bowl I want.
Yes. Yeah.
If I could light a prayer candle for one Super Bowl, if I could pick one Super Bowl combination, I would just enjoy the whole 2 weeks down here in New Orleans leading up to, and that's the other thing, living in Buffalo, living in Detroit in the winter, you have an excuse to come down to New Orleans in February. That's great. But those fan bases, to know that one of those two fan bases will finally have their suffering over, that would be a beautiful thing, especially after what's been built there. All right. Xavier Worthy.
Yes.
Should we just wait for the playoffs for Mahomes to actually hit these?
Yeah, I think basically. Well, so my current fear or theory as far as being a worthy investor is that Hollywood Brown comes back and he hits Hollywood Brown with ease, and we just live in agony on all these worthy misses. But I think I posted Worthy had like a circus route where he's running an out route that should have been probably to the sticks, and Mahomes misses him. And you can look at that route. Worthy's got a ton of separation. You can say, oh, Worthy's getting open. Why does Mahomes keep missing him? But I think part of the challenge with things we saw with Quinn Ewers and why he was so inconsistent, and with Worthy and both Adonai Mitchell not being able to connect with their quarterbacks in the NFL, is that there's probably some inconsistency in terms of where their landmarks need to be and how they're missing those. So you can have all the talent and I think hip skill and lateral agility that Worthy has, but if you're not in the right place, it doesn't matter. And his big thing of like, oh, I happen to be out of bounds right here. Like, he doesn't know where he is on the field. So that challenge, I think, really has been surprisingly bad. But I think you can continue to play him as like a wide receiver 4 or 5, but you're hoping for the big play to finally hit, and when it does, you'll feel good. But other than that, there's not a whole lot to work off of.
Yeah, we're chasing that one play, although it is
Yes.
Cleveland. I mean, it is Cleveland. I don't think it's going to be windy in Cleveland, but and it's the added value of like 12 extra points if they can finally do that. Now, contrast that. I love how you brought up landmarks, and back when I was scouting college players a lot more closely, like 15, 17 years ago, it is like doing it the same way every single time. Like doing it the same way every single time. I remember watching Danny Amendola practice at the Texas versus the Nation game back in like 2007, and you could tell like he's not competing against other players. He was competing against the platonic ideal of the route he was running. He was just he could have been in the void when he was running his reps in practice. And the landmarks, I think that's a good way to understand it, that you can be fast, you can be quick, but it has to be consistent because, as we talk about, like there's very little time for these things to happen. Now, contrast that to the Caleb Williams to Rome Odunze touchdown in the corner of the end zone last week, and I believe sometimes too much in Narrative Street. But when I saw that they were on that plane together, and they're like, "Yeah, look who showed up," and then they ended up on the same team. Like, oh, this could be special. This could be an interesting connection, because we talked about this at the top of the show when we talked about AJ Brown and Jalen Hurts. Sometimes personal relationships bubble up to fantasy football, and not just in a game to game or squeaky wheel kind of thing, but in a long term. Like how does this pass offense eventually settle out long term? And that where Williams was able to place that ball and where Odunze was able to catch it, and actually, talk about the game happening slower. He was able to, in the air, like look down. You don't usually see receivers like go up and get the ball, be able to look down, see where the end zone is, and then have the body control and the fluidity to do that. So with all that in mind, that was in garbage time, because the Bears probably played the worst half of football on both sides of the ball that any team. You can't just keep firing people and expect it to give a boost to the players. The Bears in the first half against San Francisco was the worst any team has been in any half, and then the game was over. So Odunze and Caleb Williams were able to hook up, and then you have DeAndre Swift. His heyday seems like it's past us. They're playing Minnesota, whose defense doesn't look as tough or stifling as it did earlier in the year. So if you're looking at Caleb Williams, we already have like our quarterback spectrum here. You're looking at Rome Odunze coming off of back-to-back touchdown games. You're looking at DeAndre Swift and saying, I mean, what did I actually get out of him last week? Caleb's not throwing to him as much now. Thomas Brown, your Bears, you trust in anybody except for DJ Moore this week against Minnesota?
No, but I will say, like, as far as the way that Rome's playing, he's extremely capable, and it's nice to see some of that come together as far as clicking for them. The problem with the Bears has been they don't have the bones. So Waldron built a bad skeleton, and then whoever you put in is still going to try to animate that skeleton, but it's just not, it's poorly put together, so it's not going to work well. And I think the frustration with what they do conceptually is that you can have a lot of pieces or ideas of things and like common combinations of routes, but the way that they run them is there's no attention to detail, and so they run into a lot of conflict with Caleb. And he's also not. I think there's so much ability there that he will continue to show up and give you those splash plays, especially in those moments where it is garbage time or where they're chasing and he can kind of just play free.
Right.
But when it's compressed and they don't have the detail or the structure for him, there's nothing for him to stand on. And so on your 3rd and 7, if you have everybody's running 12 yards, he's sitting there waiting, and nobody's open, and he's going to get sacked, right? Because he's just waiting, and that's the wrong play call. You got to have options for him earlier in the play, and that's been the continual frustration and why he hasn't really been able to get going, despite the talent, is that the structure's not there for him.
Yeah, the skeleton. That's a good way to put it. How much can you really change an offense in the middle of a season? Not very much.
Yeah, you're just changing your decision making, but I don't think you can really build out much additional stuff.
And then you bring up a point, I think, that explains why people get really fixated on postseason performance versus regular season performance. That's why I hope, if it's not Buffalo, Detroit, maybe get Lamar Jackson a ring, so that we can put a stake through the heart of that, because Lamar Jackson is a truly great with a capital G quarterback. But the postseason's different. The screws get tighter in the postseason. And I think you touched on something that explains why there's so much variance in the NFL, and why, especially in fantasy football, where we're measuring it and we're so obsessed about the specific results down to the number, is like what works, or a way that a team can get comfortable on offense against a mediocre defense or a poor defense. As soon as they face a good defense, it doesn't work at all. Just,
right.
completely cut off at the pass, right? And then you can get into the matchups and things too. So bottom line, no, we don't think the Bears are going to turn the corner. And maybe if their defense is so bad that they fall behind by 28 points, there'll be some garbage time. Marvin Harrison Jr. Let's put these two guys together: Marvin Harrison Jr. and Jaden Reed. Like 2/3 of the time they're a zonk, but 1/3 of the time they can almost win your week for you. Now with Reed, we have more of that squeaky wheel narrative. We already talked about with Deebo. We talked about with AJ Brown. The team is saying, now he wasn't really squeaky. The team was kind of squeaking on his behalf. Mm-hmm. Marvin Harrison Jr. had this squeaky wheel, or at least Tom Pelissero saying they're going to make him a focal point. And he did get 12 targets in that game. Arizona faces New England. Marvin Harrison Jr., Christian Gonzalez, maybe.
Yeah, no for me.
Right. So and I was doing my projections this morning. JPG, I was doing my projections. I'm like, am I really going to go negative on Harrison? But I mean, based on what, do you think that's because sometimes we get too hung up on cornerback matchups. Do you think that's operative here, though, when you're deciding whether to play Harrison is Gonzalez, and the way that the Cardinals have deployed Harrison and the way that the Patriots deploy Gonzalez?
Yes, I think Christian is committed to the top receiver almost every week. And so Marv's tight matchup challenges all year have not been good. He'll perform well again. I think I keep going back to the Rams and being, let's start everybody against the Rams. But that game where he had 2 touchdowns and 130 yards in the first quarter, right? That's him being able to play free against guys who are not competent. And you'll get those splash plays, right? But when you have a guy who's on you all game, he's not at that level where, I'm not saying he won't be, but he's not at that level right now where Kyler trusts him and he can go to him. So I don't think it'll be a Marvin Harrison game.
Yeah, it'll be 10, 12 catches for Trey McBride, and James Conner touches the ball like 25 times.
Yeah, that should be. That's how they have to win. Yeah,
and we'll see. We'll see if they can get themselves back in the division race after it looked like they were the best team in the division. And then the other one, Jaden Reed. Now it's a little different because there's multiple ways he can be deployed. I don't know if Romeo Dobbs is going to be back. That might actually be good for him. But it is also against Seattle. That actually might be good for him too, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, I don't trust him, so I wouldn't play him. He's all over the map. So I think Seattle's corners are competent. I mean, they're good players. There's an up and down. Like you can start your really great players against them and do just fine. You look at Cooper Kupp, did really well, but it's Jaden doesn't have that stability, so there's no reason for me to play him.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to reduce it down to 3 and 4 week windows, because a couple weeks ago I led off the show in a similar fashion. I'm talking about Jalen Waddle when it had been like months since he did anything of consequence, and he actually, just relying on the reputation and knowing that he didn't have any specific injury, and Tua had also held him back. But I think you're right that when we get to the fantasy playoffs, we have to even be more faithful about really just looking at that 3 to 4 week window. I like to think of it as like, what are we afraid of missing out on? Someone was asking me about Dalton Kincaid today. Like, well, what are we afraid of missing out on if we had Dalton Kincaid on our bench at this point? All right. Well, I guess I don't have. And before we turn the page to go off the rails, anything while you've got the On the Couch audience as they're preparing for Week 15, or any other thing on your mind? Again, folks, you should be following JetPack Galileo. FF Astronauts, had a great pleasure doing the show with y'all. I'm all about what y'all are about, even just the concept, exploration, going to the farthest reaches of human knowledge. Anything else you want to say before we go off the rails?
I mean, so I'm starting to work as an offense coordinator now, so it's fun to watch these NFL teams put things together, and then now I get to be like, okay, how am I going to play with this with my athletes? And so So the main game I watched was Niners Bears, and just seeing the contrast between how things are designed and how things are built, and the frustrations that I had with just the design of Bears schemes. Again, it's a lot of like high school level concepts or things that are common to the game for everybody. Like you open up a Madden playbook, it's like, okay, these plays are in here. They're tried and true plays, but and you can vary up the ways that you get to them, but it's really the same thing. And there's not a lot of isolating defenders. And what Shanahan does really well is he's picking out specific defenders. That could be a linebacker, that can be a corner, but every time he's using the motion to get that defender isolated. It's not just window dressing. It's not just, hey, let's mix it up and see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
The motion is pulling a guy over so that he can isolate somebody else. And so Shanahan does such a good job at that's as I get into my own play calling and play design, that's what I want to like try to emulate. So from that standpoint, though, I think as far as like, what do we do fantasy wise or what do we do football wise? It gives me patience with Caleb because I think the talent is still there. Patience with Rome, talent's still there. But yeah, as far as like going around and designing things, it's been that game was such a good contrast that it was really fun to watch from that standpoint.
See, I wanted to go. I always like to go non-football, but that's you just opened up a can of worms there because there's so many layers we can get into of how it informs what you see. Because now you understand when you're watching the game, you're not just following the ball, you're not just watching the individual performances. You're understanding where the offensive coordinator is coming from, the story that they're trying to author, and like you said. It's and probably what makes the Shanahan offenses work also is the why. It's the why of the play. It isn't just you do this job, you do this job, you do this job. You make this decision like I'm the offensive coordinator with a joystick and I'm controlling your brain. It's if the players really understand all the moving parts and it's to put this player in conflict, and then depending on what this player does, we'll know what to do.
Right. Yeah.
And that's why I got so excited about Ben Johnson when he replaced Anthony Lynn. Amon-Ra St. Brown went on that run because Amon-Ra St. Brown said, like, he came to us. It's a collaboration.
Yes.
Yeah,
when the players get that, like, okay, you're a part of building this, then it's like everything is unlocked. As a player, I didn't understand anything about football, right? I just go out and run. You just run and hit, right? That's like high school, even in the college, right? As a player, it was for me like, okay, I understand the scheme. As soon as you step out of, and this is why benching a player can be really valuable. As soon as you step out of that environment and you get to say, okay, like, how do these pieces really come together? What is it like for me? That learning process, there's so much value to that. So when a player is involved in the learning process or in the building process, then everybody knows what's going on, and you can attack more aggressively, or you can be more flexible on the fly. So yeah, building a system where you can be versatile, I think is really great. And the strength of most of the Shanahan schemes is just constantly adapting things.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, this see, we have to do a whole show now where we're just going to talk about things like you put your offensive coordinator hat on as an NFL, as a very close watcher of the NFL. But let's go after, and I think we might have talked about this when I was on y'all show, but where's the inspiration? Because JetPack Galileo is such a clear picture, and I think what's the origin story of that persona?
When you're rolling through fantasy and you're projecting things and you're putting things together, you're like, hey, this is astronomy. This is math. And when I'm doing football, this is artistic geometry, the way that I'm putting things together, right? Mm-hmm. And so all those, math elements, I think, really fit what I, who I am in terms of like the way that I work through things, but also the things that I enjoy. And so strap a jetpack on it and, let's ride the main theme.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, the jetpack is kind of the descendant of Galileo, right? I mean, the jetpack is like one of Galileo's children or great grandchildren, right? Yeah. And when you describe that, what I love about that is not until you put it that way that I think of space exploration as art, really. Mm-hmm. It's art. It's an expression of humanity. Icarus, it's an expression of our soul or our purpose, and then you strap a jetpack on it. Yeah. No, and that's, and I mean, again, something else that's come up in the show already is being at the frontier or being at the edge of what is possible or what we can accomplish as people, what we can find in ourselves, what can we transcend ourselves. I was just last night. I had the great pleasure, privilege of attending a Christmas party at the Dewdrop Inn. If you don't know about the Dewdrop Inn, the Dewdrop Inn was in the Green Book. It was the place like when black performers came to New Orleans in the Jim Crow era. That's where they stayed. And there was these epic jam sessions there with like Ray Charles and James Brown and everyone you can imagine where they were all there. And the place became run down, and then it was just brought back like in the last year or two back to its original glory. And Donald Harrison Jr., who's he's a world renowned. He's a jazz master. He's a true master. He's also, and he brought it up last night. He was talking about it. He was actually Notorious B.I.G.'s mentor, and they lived in the same area of Brooklyn. He was his mentor, and if you listen to Biggie, I brought this up before on the show, you will hear the jazz phrasing. Like, think about Biggie as a jazz soloist. The next time you listen to him, Donald Harrison Jr. is behind that. But the festival he has out in Long Island is called the Quantum Leap Festival, and he's into like quantum mechanics. And he said, and I didn't get a chance to ask him about this, that he's been collaborating with like quantum physicists, and now they figured out how to do like 4-dimensional rhythms and 4-dimensional music, right? Like pushing.
Yeah, amazing. Well, so everything is math, right? And the way that you're expressing things, math is just the objectification of something, or
right.
a method to get to a thing. And so music is math, football is math, in the way that you're calculating your angles or how you're pulling different players. It's all that's the language of the universe that God made.
It's the language
written
exactly.
in math. That just the fact that we have rules that we can rely on at all. That's somebody wrote that, and so to me that's great, and that's where the creativity comes from. The way we were talking about earlier, you need a structure to be solid in order to get to the point of versatility or flexibility. And if I don't have that structure or that stable base, then I'm just rolling around in the wind. I'm a wave pushed by the sea. But if I have a solid base, then I can really launch rockets.
Yeah. I'm reminded of Matt Waldman. I think I have to bring him up at least once a show because he's just the man.
Guy.
Really.
Yeah.
You get to the top of the mountain, that's who's there. Matt Waldman's there. Yes. And he talks about like the thousands of hours you put in so that you can play a solo that sounds like you just made that up in the moment. You're such a great improviser, Yeah. And you're right. I think it's a Gödel's theorem. Or I don't remember. I think it was. I took a philosophy of math class way back. That's when I fell in love with philosophy. Actually, it was a philosophy of math class. I brought it up on the show a few times before. That the math can express more than words because you can put a number on every single word, and then there's one number higher than that. So you can always express more with math. I mean, that's like numbers are underneath everything. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everything's predetermined. It doesn't necessarily mean that there is a free will. That's we get into these areas and they all collide. But that's why we love it, because it all collides in the world of football. It all collides in the world of fantasy football. It all collides in our gourds, and we all stimulate each other. And that's why I love everything that I get to do and see from FF Astronauts and JetPack Galileo. And we like to push the frontiers for you because you deserve the best. To give us the opportunity to do this, it is a privilege. It is a pleasure to serve you because you're so classy.